Hey guys, congratulations on making it to the home stretch. We're here in week 7 of our 8-week course. And I just want to take a couple minutes to talk to you about the only assignment that you have due for this week. No My Math Lab, no journals, none of that stuff. The final project. Now, if you look here in the learning space, you will see several sections, but a lot of them don't really have a lot of content for you to go through. There's a little bit. So for example, here, this problem solving, I strongly recommend clicking on that section, and it just gives you a really brief overview of the different things that we've done over the course of the term, because it might kind of jog a few things that you might want to use when you're completing the later portion of your project. 7.1 just gives you a really brief overview. There's nothing even to click on. It just tells you basically, hey, in this learning block, you're going to do your final project. But here, I do want to turn your attention to where it says 7.1.1 discussion, final project check-in / questions. Now, it obviously has the word optional written under here, which means you do not need to use this discussion board. However, I would appreciate it if you do have any questions or concerns about anything for the project. Most of you guys have a tendency to reach out over email rather than the discussion board, which is perfectly fine, as I've always said. But especially with this final project, because it's a pretty big deal, right? It's worth like 200 points. So if you have a question about something, there's a pretty good chance that somebody else in the class has a question about it as well. So if you wouldn't mind putting your questions there, I would really appreciate it. But again, you can keep sending me those emails as normal if that's what you would rather do. Here for the final project, this is literally just telling you again, well, I guess up here, the 7-1, this said you're going to review your final project, and here it says, now you're getting ready to submit your final project. But tomato, really nothing to do in those sections. So the real major action is right here in the 7.2.1 final project submission. And I'm going to open up the guidelines and rubric. And I want to point out a few things. Obviously, you're going to read the overview. And as we're looking here at the prompt, that link that is there where it says selected problem solving examples, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I want to turn your attention first to where it says employment opportunity analysis. If you read all of these questions in the prompt, they're going to sound very familiar to you because you already answered these questions once when you did your milestone 1. Now, I'll scroll down here to where it says Roman numeral 2, living expenses and debt. And again, all these questions are going to be very familiar to you because you already answered them when you did milestone 2. So what does that mean in terms of your final project? It means that you've at least started, and several of you guys have definitely completed 2/3 of your final project, because as we'll talk about in a minute, there is this Roman numeral 3 down here. That's where the new part of your project comes in. But 2 out of the 3 sections of your project should be at least really well started, if not all of the way completed. I have said it over and over and over again, and this will be the last time you need to hear me say it. The reason it was so important for you to do a good job on your milestone 1 and your milestone 2 is that they are directly part of your final project. If you look here through the guidelines in the rubric, you won't see a link to a template like you have the previous milestone assignments. There's not a document embedded in here for you to turn in your final project, answer the questions. And that's because, again, the part 1 and part 2 of your final project, you've already done. So what I would do if I were you, now if you want to start a new document and retype all the information from your milestone 1 and your milestone 2 into the final project, you could. But what I would just do is I would copy all my milestone 1, the Word document, all my milestone 2, and I would just paste them into one final project document to turn in all together. And since your milestone 1 and 2 were Word documents, it'll be really easy to copy and paste that. So after you have copied and pasted your milestone 1 and your milestone 2 into that document, the part that you You cannot skip this part. Again, I've said it a lot. This is the last time I'm going to say it, I promise. Go back and look at your feedback from the milestone 1 and the milestone 2 when I graded them for you. And please do the things that I asked you to do, or answer the questions that I asked you in that feedback. When I go through, I really try to leave like really good positive feedback. That's just part of my personality. But I try really hard to not do that as much as I normally would on the milestone and milestone 2, or milestone 1 and 2, because I want it to be really easy for you to go back and look at your previous assignment and see, ooh, she wrote something in here. Sometimes I did say something really nice just because I'm like, man, this was really great and I couldn't help myself. But for the most part, if there is no comment written in the feedback section next to that portion of the rubric. So for example, in your milestone 1, there was a portion of the rubric that said comparison. So if I just gave you all of your points and did not write feedback out to the side, then you can feel very assured that your portion was good to go. You don't need to add anything to improve it. You can just leave it as is in your final submission. Now, there were times that I gave you all of your points for your milestone 1 or your milestone 2, but I wrote out to the side some kind of feedback, something that you need to needed to address. And I've said that. That's why I've said, even if you got a good grade on your assignment, go back and look at the feedback, because I graded the early assignments a lot more leniently than I will on this final project submission, because it's kind of like those early assignments are the rough draft. So this final submission is all about taking what I asked you to do in the earlier rough drafts and adding whatever you need to do for the final submission. So even if I gave you all your points, if I wrote a question out to the side, if I said, oh, make sure next time you include this, you will not get all of your points for the final submission if you don't address what I asked you to do. So I cannot stress how important that is. And just to further prove my point, here, I know that there is, a lot just came up on the screen. I understand that. That's a little, this could be overwhelming. But what is over here on the left-hand side is the rubric from the milestone 1. And over to the right is the rubric for your final project. Now, if you look at the rubric for your milestone 1, you're going to see that the language is almost identical. Here's where the big difference comes in. In your milestone 1, you got 100% of your points if it fell in the proficient category, okay? Which means, pretty darn good, right? On the final project, the proficient is only 85%, because you've got this whole other category that's added for the final project that is exemplary. So that is where 100% of your points are. So let's say, for example, I gave you all of your points for the location portion of your milestone 1, but I wrote out to the side, it would be good for you to add this, or what other elements could have you added to account for that? So if I wrote some feedback out to the side of location, but I still gave you a proficient, if you don't go back and answer those questions or to add whatever I asked you to add, whereas you got all of your points because proficient was the highest you could get in milestone 1, if you don't fix that and add what I asked you to add, it'll still be proficient over here in the final. But now the final is not worth 100% anymore. Proficient is now worth only 85%. So if you go back and now, let's talk really quickly about the milestone 2 portion of your final submission. Milestone 2, the Roman numeral 2 part, everything you turned in for milestone 2 is very similar to milestone 1. If I didn't give you any feedback, you are good to go. You can pretty much assume, well, not pretty much, you can assume and feel confident that you can just copy and paste what you did the first time, and you will move from that proficient category to that exemplary category. There is one exception and only one. Okay, in the milestone 2, and I'm actually going to make, this is the milestone 2 rubric. I'm going to make it a little bigger here so that you can see what I'm talking about. So it said here when you did milestone 2, oops, let's see here. There we go. It said in the prompt, it said right here where employment opportunity selection. It said, although it is not required at this point, you will defend your selection using your calculations and personal criteria in the final project. This one portion right here is the only thing that needs to be different between your milestone 2 and your final submission. Because in your milestone 2, all you had to do was say, I choose journalist, I choose assistant tutor, whatever job it was that you chose. But you did get a warning up front here that at this point you weren't going to have to do it, but you are going to have to defend your selection in your final project. So I chose journalist because. Now a lot of you guys, when you turned in your milestone 2, you went ahead and took care of that. You already did that explanation in your milestone 2 submission. So if you did that, you don't need to go back and add anything. But a lot of you guys just did exactly what the rubric told you had to do, which was you just picked one. I chose curator, period. If you didn't follow that up with some reasoning, you need to go back and add that for your final submission. And you can see here in the rubric where it was reflected. So over here on the left was the milestone 2 rubric that I used to grade your milestone 2. So either you selected an employment opportunity or you didn't, right? You either got 100 or you got nothing. Whereas it doesn't ask you to explain. Whereas in the final project submission, so over here, addressing the same thing, let me zoom in and make it bigger. So this is your final project. Here for selection, it does say selects and defends an opportunity. So even just to go to the proficient, so see the difference. Before you were able to just say, I choose this. Now you need to say, I choose this because. And you will also notice that they've included, now they've used the word calculation in here. I'm not necessarily asking you to say, I chose the assistant tutor, and here are a bunch of math equations to justify why I picked it. In this case, I'm willing to accept calculations as far as like, this is really far away. I don't want to move to this place. I know that this salary isn't going to be very good for my family. I chose this one because the benefits are good. As long as you have some kind of reasoning, you're going to get here in that exemplary category. So I chose this job because, as long as you've got some kind of follow-up, you're going to get your points for that. So now, hopefully that covers the first 2 portions of the final project. So now let's look at this final project 3. So again, we've covered Roman numeral number 1, Roman numeral number 2. You have copied and pasted those into a document, and then you have gone back and you've looked at the feedback I've given you. You've made any improvements, made any additions that you needed to add. Now you're ready to go here to the self-selected problem. So in part 3, and for part 3, you can literally just take that same document that you have, copied and pasted those milestone things into, and you can just write self-selected problem, period, and then start answering the question underneath there. If I were you, I would, just because I feel like it makes it easier for me to grade and it makes it easier for you to make sure you're not forgetting a piece, I would copy these questions and I would paste them into the document and I would just answer each question underneath. But again, you don't have to, that's up to you, but it makes it a lot easier for me to go back and figure out what part of the question you're answering. So it gives you a couple different options for how you can attack part 3. First of all, it says, select a problem you are facing currently that would benefit from mathematical or quantitative reasoning. Now, I need to tell you that if you want to use your own personal problem, I need you to email me and let me look at the problem and approve it, and that needs to be done by Wednesday. So via email by Wednesday night, I need you to send me an email saying, this is the problem I was thinking about using. Will this one be okay? And just the reason for that is that sometimes the problems people have used weren't really very appropriate for the class, because this is still a math class, right? So it needs to be something mathematical or quantitative. And sometimes the questions that people chose to use, back when I first started teaching this class and I didn't know any better to get them to tell me what they were doing first, they would end up doing a problem that really didn't fit the rubric, and it was hard to give them their points. So this way, I know what you're planning to do in advance, so I can just go ahead and tell you, yes, I think that'd be great, or not. The easiest thing to do is where it says, if you're uncomfortable using a personal problem, select one from the selected problems. So if you're really wanting just for what the easiest route is, click on this list of problems. And there are 3 different problems that are already submitted in here. And you can just use those problems for your self-selected problems. They were designed by the people that wrote the course specifically because they do address elements of the rubric well. But of course, you can most definitely do your own problem. It is up to you. I would say if you use one of these problems, when you are typing into your final project, if you would just please say, I chose problem number 1, the one where I need to relocate, or I chose problem number 2, the one where I need to plan a party, something like that, so that I know. And if we look at the rubric, you'll see that it's really to your benefit to outline that for me anyway. So let's take a look at that rubric in the self-selected problem portion. So if we go, I know this rubric is huge and overwhelming, guys, but it's really just because it's 3 projects worth of rubrics. They're all put together. All right, so now we're looking here where we say self-selected problem, context. So the question, for example, says, let's go back up to the problem for a second. So it says context. Explain the context of your problem. What is the problem? What factors are involved? So I am reading just like the first question right there. Explain the context of the problem. What is the problem? What factors are involved? Okay, so what I have a tendency to have people do a lot in the past is that they'll say, my problem, I chose problem number 2. And then they don't answer the questions that go along with it. They'll tell me what problem they chose, but they're not saying what exactly is the problem, what factors are involved in the problem. Well, if you look here at this rubric, and we're looking at how we would address your points, does not explain the context and factors, okay? So if you literally just tell me, I picked this problem, I can't give you any points because you did not tell me anything about the context, okay? So what are some of the things you need to consider? Like, what the heck is the problem in the first place, okay? So you choose problem 2, you're planning a party. Well, that doesn't sound like a problem. Well, yes, there are inherently like little problems built into there. So you need to make sure that you're giving me an explanation of what are the issues embedded within that situation. Okay, now looking here at part B, breaking the problem down into key pieces. Is it a multi-step problem? Are there multiple considerations that will require different approaches? So A, you're basically saying this is the situation, this is what could be a problem, this could be a problem because of this. B, you're describing like how are you going to analyze the problem? Like what are you going to do? I'll give you another big hint. All those strategies we used at the very beginning of the term that are specifically geared towards analyzing problems might be a good one to use here. And then for part C, this is where you're actually going to put your steps into action. You're going to say, like, here are the things that I am going to do. Here are the things that I am going to figure out. Sometimes B and C, people get it a little bit confused. B is, what is the way that I'm going to analyze the problem? Again, maybe use some of those strategies from the beginning of the term. C is, now that I've analyzed the problem, here is what I'm actually going to do. And then D is where you actually do what you say you're going to do. Okay, do the math to explain. I remember, again, this is a math class. Sometimes I've actually had people do this part of the project and not do any math whatsoever when they're answering that part of the question. Considering the fact that the rubric asks for it, makes it really hard for me to give you any points if there's absolutely no calculations in there. Okay, making sure that you're explaining what those steps mean. And then finally, in the last part, for some reason people have a tendency to skip results. And I'm not sure why that happens. So now I understand 100% that you're not actually having the party. You're not actually moving at this point. Okay, but what this is more for is I've analyzed the problem, I've done the figuring, I've done the math. I will say that one thing that I really think is handy to do is to anticipate. It's definitely my favorite problem solving strategy. Anticipating problems that could come up, because being prepared for the unexpected is a great way to cut off problems before they even happen. So results is where you look at all your calculations, you look at all of your planning, and you're kind of making a conclusion, and then you're going to defend your conclusion to me. Give me some reason why. I think this is a great plan. Here's why. Ooh, maybe I should go back and consider something else. Is there anything you've left out? So just looking back at all of your other steps, your B, your C, your D, is this a pretty good plan? Obviously, most of you are probably going to think it's a good plan. Explain to me why. I'm not asking you to write me a novel, but I am asking you to give me a good reason for why you think you have concluded everything that you need to conclude, and why you've done every kind of analysis and all of that. You've taken all the possible problems into consideration. Hey, hopefully this little overview helps you to be prepared for what I know is going to be some really awesome final project submissions, because I know I was really happy with your milestone 1s and your milestone 2s. As usual, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Although remember, I would really, really like you to reach out on the discussion board if at all possible.